Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, IT Strategy for the Future. This is part 3 of our 3-part series, and we are going to go ahead and cover mapping out your IT strategy today. So we have 3 presenters, I guess 3 experts on the call today. We have Taylor Mercedes, John Honadell, and Phil Keeney. And just some housekeeping items before I turn it over to John. You can customize what you're seeing right now by going to the GoToWebinar screen viewer and selecting your options there. If you are having any audio issues this afternoon, we find that the phone call dial-in option is a little bit more reliable than our computer audio, as it is not streamed over internet. And if you have any questions, please submit them through the questions panel, as we do not monitor the chat box during this webinar. And there will be a strategic polling question in the presentation today, just to give our presenters a idea of who their audience is this afternoon. And as always, there is a survey question at the end of the presentation. Please let us know how we did and insert any questions that we did not get to during the presentation into that survey. And you can download the handout that you are seeing on the screen today by going to the handouts section of your GoToWebinar tab. So without further ado, John, they're all yours.
Thank you, Kaylee. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Today we'll be digging into your IT strategy posture and how to map out that strategy. Before we get started, we assume going into the webinar that your organization is taking a strategic approach to its initiatives. Really, you just have to start there. We sometimes find when we start talking about IT strategy, it doesn't quite click for folks because they aren't taking an overall strategic approach to running their business. So we aren't speaking the same language in that case. And not just following along with the list. We definitely want to be strategic with it. In this webinar series we built for folks, it's definitely intentionally designed, and it's about the choices they make in their business, or who want to be more intentional for that matter. That's who it's geared for. So just keep that in mind as we proceed.
Yeah, absolutely, John. So as was mentioned, we're going to be digging into today that strategic roadmap, that IT roadmap. So we'll be digging into what that's going to include. We'll show you a quick tidbit of kind of how we do that, how we go through strategy, how we visualize that, and we'll talk about how to leverage that as well as who that's going to benefit. So I think a good place to start is just to kind of walk through some of the key elements that you should have in these strategic roadmaps before we dig into kind of showing you what we do. So obviously we want to have that strategy statement. This is something that's kind of followed us through the entire series here, is linking those business strategies with your IT initiatives. So you want to have that strategy. It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically IT focused when you write that out, but you want to have those priorities listed through and how they relate to your business and what you want to do strategically in that space. Obviously, those metrics, those timelines, the initiatives, the projects that you want to complete, we want to have those on there. And you should do them over the next several months, quarters, and then maybe even years, depending on your organization. And you want to have those approximate start dates and end dates for the different projects and initiatives, so you have that all visualized as well. And then, of course, you want to have a prioritized list. So this is something that sometimes gets skipped. So in that first part of the series, we talked about, okay, prioritizing the things that you want to do in your organization. We should pull this list back in here and have that whole checklist going down of what you want to do from top to bottom, what's most important. And that's really something that should be revisited on a regular basis and refreshed periodically, because obviously as you're growing and you're changing, your priorities might change too. So you want to be able to quickly go back to that and swap things out as necessary as you're progressing. Business justification, that's really, like we had mentioned, kind of the thread through all of this, understanding why you're doing this so you can communicate. Really with this roadmap, it's going to be a communication tool. So you want to be able to describe why you're doing what you're doing and break all that down, and just have for the next 12 months or so, it's a good idea just to have a detailed reason of why you're doing things. And if you're going out any further, just kind of keeping it simple, because like we said, it can kind of switch as you go out. You want to be able to be agile and plan in that way as well. So obviously cost, that's a big one, especially when you're pulling in finance, making sure that you're doing some reasonably accurate costing on your projects and your initiatives over the next 12 months. Less detailed later out for this one as well. We see this right now. I know, Phil, as you price things out for clients, we're seeing things are constantly changing. We don't really know what to expect right now with some of the sourcing that we're doing. So you don't want to start planning on numbers that might not make sense. Right now, I feel like we could say 3-6 months later, there's such a range when it comes to some of the cost of stuff. So making sure you're planning for that. And then obviously we want accountability for each of the projects that we put on our roadmap. So you want to put an owner or sponsor associated with every single initiative on your roadmap. So whether that's an IT leader or if it's someone within the business that's going to kind of push it through the pipeline here for you and support you in that, you want to make sure you have those stakeholders lined up. So when you go down and you review, you know exactly where to go from there.
Taylor, I think I kind of messed up and missed a slide. Could you jump back to number 2 for me?
Did I miss something? What did I miss?
I think it was my fault. I
Okay.
did a little bit more. There you go. That's a good one. So a little plug for Stanball Nest here, if you don't mind. I'd like to encourage you to go to the About section and also the Services tab of Stanball Nest. It's located at stanballnest.com. There's lots of really good stuff published about the firm on our website. So if you don't know about us, you know, it's going to explain who we are, what we do. As you can see on this particular slide there, as you go across from left to right, if you need any advisory, accounting, technology, or workforce services, give us a shout, please.
And I do think that one's super important just because the stuff that we're talking about, like John had mentioned earlier, we want to make sure you're looking at your overall strategic vision as a business.
Right.
It's hard to look at that IT without this. So we definitely want you to, if you're not in that space, take a look there for sure. So
we'll talk about that a little more and how it ties in. So back to number 3 there. You really just need to get it all out on the table. You know, that's the bottom line. And really that goes to show you in those advisory services and other aspects of your businesses, that's what we're talking about. It doesn't matter if it's not of a technical nature. I mean, we're definitely going to be talking about those things too as we sit around the table and discuss where the IT department needs to go. But really, it could be more operational and administrative in nature because you really have to start there. You know, what does the company need? As you build a statement, you could even just throw in your company's own mission statement right in the beginning. I love doing that. I don't want to give it all away here. You know, I'd like you to hire me to help you with it, but that's the bottom line. I mean, they need to be cohesive. It might be a good idea to include the mission statement in that beginning of that strategy statement. And again, yeah, the two should definitely align.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely the glue. Keep the glue between what you're doing in IT versus what you're doing in your business, and making sure everyone knows that. That's huge. So for sure.
Agreed.
All right. So we're gonna throw a polling question in here, nice and early. Phil, you want to run through this one? All right. He's got that launched for me. Bear with me just a sec. I lost my window.
Well, I could pick it up. So it says, you know, number one's yes. IT leaders do have a seat at the decision-making table. Maybe you sit at the table sometimes, but you really only provide feedback when there's specific initiatives at hand, or no, you know, you never really sit at the table and discuss IT decisions.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it gets interesting with that one because we've got folks who will make their business plan and then, okay, they have an initiative that's maybe slightly related to IT and they bring folks in. But I think there's a missed opportunity sometimes when you operate that way from getting that insight from your IT leaders. When you're working on other initiatives, they may have important insights and ideas and just a different way of looking at things that you may adjust what your initiatives are in different business areas once you have that feedback, since IT is just kind of the backbone for how we do business now. So
look at that. I promise I was not clicking on yes repeatedly. It was not me.
Oh yeah, so we've got 67% here of folks who feel like they've got IT as a key driver here. That's great. Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. So now I'm going to hand it back here to John, and he's going to kind of walk through what our process for strategic IT road mapping is, what we've adopted for our clients, just to give you a taste of how we visualize that and what that process looks like. So John, feel free to jump right in.
I hate to be so disorganized, but if you don't mind, I'll speak to those polling questions just for 1 second. Thank you. So, you know, obviously the decision makers need to know. So I'm glad to see 67%, you know, you're there, you're talking to them. It's important. I think about big business things like maybe mergers and acquisition comes to mind. Sign the disclosures, get the IT department in there looking around if you're looking at buying someplace, or expect somebody that's buying you, if there's going to be a merger, to want to do the same thing. The buyer really needs to know what they're buying, and more importantly, what do they need to do to bring things up to speed if they find the IT department in disorder. I'm not saying that your organization has a disordered IT department, but it's possible there's some things that might need to be purchased. And more importantly, have a third party come in and take a look. Third set of eyes, that's impartial view. You don't have to worry about being skewed because you're trying to look out. They look at the IT department as trying to look out for the leadership of the company, right? Because they want to get top dollar. So bring a third party on. Stan Ness can do that type of thing for you. Just wanted to throw that out anyway.
No, thanks for the context.
Thank you. I get passionate about that. In my experience in the past, I wasn't brought in to take a look. We caught the tail end of it. It was terrible.
I did from the start, but yeah. So I've got the slide up here for our roadmap. I know this part can be kind of exciting for people. I know a lot of organizations don't map out strategy in this way, so feel free to dig in. Exciting stuff.
When we were talking earlier, I said itinerary comes to mind. When you use traveling as an example, Taylor just did some traveling. She knows there's destination points and there's timing involved. So there's a lot to that in this particular slide. It shows what we use, actually. This is actually what I use daily in order to put the client strategies into action. And basically, this is our itinerary or our roadmap. Once a technical analysis is performed by the technical alignment account manager, and then the VCIO, somebody like me, has reviewed all the data, we take that information and create initiatives and make recommendations. We can break things down quarterly from left to right, as you see in this slide, quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, as you go across. Initiatives that support the strategy, you can see those down in the bottom right for this particular sample. It starts out with EOY planning, hardware refresh, new site, security. I'll stop at switches project. We'll come back to that in a second. They get inserted then over in the timeline on a quarterly basis. And if you really look closely, you'll see some dates in there that have to do with the time that you're starting and beginning in the quarter itself. So, maybe January, it may be, there may be a due date associated later on down the road, but you can plug them in and be more specific with the timing. So they can be listed by month as well. And then also, please notice the budgetary numbers. There's that cost again. Oh, we just don't have an open checkbook. Doggone it. So $1,500 for upgrade and setup. You can see up there in the quarter 1 new site project, $55,500. That's a big lift. And then, of course, if you look up in that quarterly column, you'll see that the total's listed. You could hop over to the next slide. It's going to be kind of similar.
There you go.
There we go. So now I mentioned switches project. So if we drill into this a little deeper, on the right-hand side, you can see the project listed at the top, and then there's these recommendations that are listed. In this case, there's 4 of them. If we go over into quarter 2 and look at one of them, we see switches project listed there, and the very first one in that list is replace switches. Okay, so we've got some switches to swap out. Yeah, and then we jump over to quarter 4. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Back on that slide, thanks. You see research other switches is going to come up towards the tail end of the year. So obviously we've got some more work to do on that initiative. So, you can really break things down pretty granularly in here. From all this then, from this roadmap is where we generate reports. And that's the part that really ties into when we go sit down at the table with leadership, right? We can show them this initiatives roadmap, and then we can also go back and strategically tie that into all the projects associated with it. And more importantly, we can track the process. We talked previously about metrics. We can move things around if maybe there's not enough money in the bank account to perform a project by third quarter of 2022. So maybe we need to punt that down the road a little ways. It really provides everyone just a great view of the process, and it's really in an easy to understand format. I really love it. I mean, it's hard to find something out there that's this effective.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of tools out there that can do this. they're not as well targeted as something like we use here. We do this very specifically for folks with managed IT, but I feel like
Right.
a tool like this could work really well, even if you have your own IT department. We talked about those technical alignment people. If you've got network admins within your team, they can be identifying things, best practices, and adding that in, as well as strategic initiatives. We'll dig into that a little bit later here, but super powerful tool. That visualization, it just becomes a great tool for communication.
Right. If I hadn't said it appropriately, the part that feeds these initiatives, right, that we can bring to the executives, the leadership of an organization, all has to do with standards that we use, those best practices standards that we need to follow. And we ask those critical questions, we get the answers, we determine if they're in alignment or if they're not. And if they're not, obviously there's work to be done.
Yeah, for sure.
John and Taylor there, for the folks on the call, one of the things you have to take a look at, and I've seen many times over, most folks have a halfway roadmap, I guess, if you will, in Excel format, right? So they have Excel documents all over the place with, budgets inserted, potential timelines, projects, but a lot of times it's very confusing to read and to follow from what's been done in terms of the steps, the sign-offs, how much has been budgeted and how much of that budget has been allocated or used. So just, as we think about where we started from the first presentation to where we're at for the third one here, we had talked, it's always coming up to the third one. Everybody wants to know, okay, tell me how to do it. Like, what does it look like? Show me some visual. And that's how I am. I get everything conceptualized. I can conceptualize everything, and I can from a theoretical perspective, okay, I get it, I understand it. But what we're trying to walk you folks through here is, okay, now we're to the point of, here's the process, here's what it looks like. Okay, here's the format that we use to be able to provide structure. And this isn't just Q1 through Q4 of fiscal year or year end, whatever that looks like for folks in budget. There's a whole factor of security and compliance in here that we align. It's our standards library. And that's key too for folks. You can't just look at, I think we talked about this, I think in section 2, you can't just look at projects as part of strategy, right? You got to look at the whole picture. And that whole picture is not only projects, but security, risk to the organization, cost to the organization, the risk of not investing in the Ronnie effect, the risk of not investing and the ROI. There you go. The return on investment. There we go. We'll get the acronyms down. So it's a holistic picture. It's that strategy piece of it that has to come together. And it's beautiful when you put it into a structured format to be able to present to leadership or to the board of directors, wherever those may be within the organization. So good stuff here. I always love the visual.
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings us right into leveraging it. You both kind of spoke to making sure those standards and alignment reviews are in place, looking at best practices. So like I said, not just focusing on the strategy. Obviously, we want to make sure everything feeds back into strategy, but then you also need to make sure what you're covering, what best practices your organization needs to abide by, any compliance, making sure for insurance purposes, you've got these things mapped out and documented, and building that into your plan as well. So building things up with that, starting there. Then budget, obviously this is a huge one. When you're having these conversations with functional leaders and budget folks within your organization, accounting, you definitely want to have this in front of you, something like this in front of you, because it like I said before, it's a communication tool more than anything. You're going to be able to visualize and say, okay, this is what we'd like to do. As you're having those conversations, you can prioritize what happens when, you can control those dollars and where they're going when you have that tool in front of you. And it really helps you balance those priorities. And then also visualize trade-offs as you need to make changes, because obviously it's a living document. It's going to change based on what's happening in your organization, as your priorities are shifting, new stuff that's coming up, and as your needs evolve. So it's going to be huge. Yeah. And then also planning. It's going to really help with project planning, things like that. As you have things coming up, you're going to be able to anticipate, especially if you have internal IT, your resource needs. So maybe you have a very major project, a big project coming along. You're going to need more resources for that. You're going to be able to see that ahead of time and plan for that. And that's the huge thing with this roadmap. It's no surprises. That's what we really like about it. As we go to our clients, and we have a roadmap filled out. We don't have to go and say, well, you need to go do this now, surprise, add this line item to your budget. We're thinking that through, it's added in, we can plan, we know what resources we're gonna need internally, and if it's a larger organization, what they may need to kind of push through. Same with software and vendor selection, just being able to plan that sort of stuff, looking at when you're gonna evaluate these options, and just like you said, knowing that cost ahead of time, visualizing it, planning it, making sure that we talked about having owners for each project, making sure those folks are factoring in what they're going to need to do for these projects way ahead of time, and they're not sprung upon them to be able to have more responsibilities. They know it's coming. So great for planning there. And then communication, obviously, is going to provide clarity to that functional leadership, your managers. So as you're making changes, it's not just having this conversation, well, we're going to change everything and here it is, and just and not really giving them time to get ready. You can have that available to them. It's going to help you balance new requests that come in. So obviously we have folks, if you're in leadership, you're used to folks coming to you and asking for new things all the time, especially tech toys are a fun one. Well, I want to use this toy now, I want to have this tool, and just having it thrown in and not really implemented within a process. The road mapping really helps with that. You come back to functional leadership and say, well, this is what we're doing right now. This fits in here, or maybe it doesn't. You can really have a tool to justify whether or not you're going to do something, and use that to communicate. And it's also helpful for gaining buy-in from different leaders within functional areas, to really understand why you're doing things, and how you're doing it, so everyone is on the same page with that as well.
Oh, great points. From my background, overseeing an IT department, the big things for me were best practices. Let's do what others are doing successfully. Why try to reinvent the wheel? That's huge. Compliance, you're probably going to have to meet certain standards at some point. So, let's make sure you're in compliance. Gain early stakeholder buy-in. What you mentioned, that's huge. You don't, and early is the key word. You don't want to do all this work thinking you're going to go a certain direction and then find out that leadership had no desire to do that, and they're not going to pay, and they're not going to cut the check. You're done. That's a terrible place to be. And then I'd like to point out insurance in this mix, and I think Phil could probably touch on that. Cybersecurity insurance carriers have certain expectations of you, believe it or not. And part of this strategic road mapping is helpful if they know you're doing it. If they haven't started asking you questions yet about your security compliance or how you're, foreseeing the future and what you need to do to tighten things up as things go along, because it's going to have to get tighter and tighter without interrupting production, it's coming. They're going to ask soon. Phil, do you have any comments on the insurance front?
So you're 100% accurate. And I had a conversation with a liability broker probably a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and I made mention about one of the tool sets that we use this process here for customers. And he's like, hey, if we ever run into customers as we're working together from a partnership perspective, we want to be able to have access to what they've done within their strategy, their strategic cyber or security risk portfolio within this process here, because that gives them insight into the risk that those brokers are taking within that for that organization. I can tell you right now, and I've seen it, you may have cyber liability insurance in place and you have a breach and you come back up, your time comes up for renewal, that carrier will drop you because of that one breach. As ridiculous as it sounds, you pay for insurance for the sake of security, but as soon as you utilize it, then they want to drop you. And really what it comes down to is your risk profile. What's their risk as a broker? What is their risk? What risk are they assuming by carrying you as an organization? So I can tell you right now, and the market has changed dramatically within the last 6 to 8 months. So just be cautious, be aware, be on the lookout as you, and I don't want to say as you get cyber liability insurance because you should already have it, but as you're coming up for renewals, the criteria to qualify and to get the best rates are going to be determined upon your security posture. And that's a whole nother conversation webinar we can dig into, but the point that I'm making here is by having strategy in place, a roadmap in place, those are some things that should be laid out. You know, what is your risk posture on a scale of 1 to 5? And if you're up the echelon of 5 being the highest, or, you know, 5 being the highest, if you're a 3.5 or 4, you need to have in that roadmap what you're doing to reduce that risk. Because it's not only risk to your business, but it's also risk to your customers. So just, again, keep that in mind as we think about, you know, mapping stuff out. It's a holistic plan here, not just technology, not just IT. It's all these other pieces that come together.
Very true.
I feel like this roadmap sometimes is like the translator between all of these different parties within an organization, taking what you're doing in IT and just being able to disseminate that in a way that everyone understands. So whether it's insurance or functional leaders or even staff, as new stuff is coming through, it's just super great tool. And that kind of segues well into our next section here. Who's going to benefit from doing this? I mean, I feel like we've gone through and it seems sort of obvious, but obviously your technology leadership, it's going to make, if you're in leadership and technology, it's going to make your life so much easier just to be able to present things in a way that's going to make sense to leadership. Their eyes aren't going to glaze over as you talk about what you want to work on in the coming months and quarters. It's going to make sense to them because you're going to have it linked to their specific initiatives. And hopefully, as a leader, you're already kind of going to be having those conversations with leadership, and you have that seat at the table. But this really just helps facilitate that relationship and get everyone on the same page and get that buy-in from leadership as you want to push things through and negotiate what you want to do in terms of new projects and initiatives. So super helpful there. We talked about functional leadership a little bit. Your managers, they're going to be able to be strategic when they request new and improved technologies as well. So they'll be more in the loop and they'll understand what's going on, and hopefully the requests you see coming from them are going to be more in alignment with what you want to do in terms of strategy and how you want your roadmap to work. And then cost traceability, that's another huge one. Just being able to tell where your dollars are going, what areas of your business they're being allocated to. Your roadmap's going to be able to help with that, so you can view your budget a little bit better, and understand that a little bit better. And then just giving technology a voice in the different parts of the business, different functional areas of the business, making sure that you're plugged in and that you're innovating in those areas and that technology has that seat at the table. And then staff and project teams, this gets impacted as well. Whether you have project teams or not, staff is definitely a big one. You're defining why folks are working on the projects they're working on, or why changes are being made within an organization. It's going to make more sense to the staff of what's happening. You're going to be able to have a clear line of communication between your leadership and your staff saying, okay, this is the direction we're going. And it kind of helps with the uneasiness that comes with throwing in new IT projects. Like, people get a little nervous. You've got some folks who like things the way they are. They like things to stay the same. And if you can map it out and you can explain the why and you can visualize it and give them time, that whole process goes a lot easier. You get better buy-in. You just have a better result in terms of adoption and everything as well. So lots of benefits all around on this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think in short, everyone does benefit, and good communication's the key to it. Those little conversations you have with these groups, you want to basically just be saying the same things to them, and don't be afraid to listen, especially to the staff. You get a lot of great ideas off that production floor if you go out there and float around, and even in an IT position. I know you're busy, you have to go out and work on a computer or whatever, but don't be afraid to go out there and just kind of listen around the table to see what's going on, and keep them included throughout, right?
Yeah, definitely. This gets everyone's voices involved here, which I think is huge.
Well, I think it's just important, again, to say it one more time. Get it out on the table. Doesn't matter what it is. All aspects of the business, to see how IT can assist the organization with its efforts.
For sure. And I think we touched on this in the last webinar a little bit, but even if you feel like you don't have what we've mapped out for you, you don't have a tool like that, maybe it doesn't quite look like that, just start somewhere. Start where you are with what you've got and start building on it, because you don't want to spend a whole lot of time spinning your wheels trying to make something perfect and not get anywhere. Just start where you are. Like we've got here, evaluate where you are, identify what those goals are, where you want to go. That's the critical part, and then you can build that strategy. And if this is something that is difficult to wrap your head around, you really don't know where to start, how to map it out, maybe you do just want to have that really great result like we've got right now, you can always talk to us. We've got these tools built out. We've run through this with AE folks on a regular basis, so we can certainly help with that. So if you want to kind of take a look at our tools a little bit closer, or if you have some questions about kind of building that process or using the tools, definitely reach out. We'll do a consultation with you, a free consultation. We're happy to dig into that. Yeah. I'm taking a look at questions here. Let's see what we've got. So in terms of visualization, there's a lot you can do. We talked about Excel. Obviously, we have our specific tool that we like to use that we can use in conjunction with our clients. We have a question here about recommending simple visualization. I don't know if I read it out loud for a small AEC firm. So you can do it like this. You could do it in a Visio, but I really feel like our process, our tools are made really well for this sort of thing, especially for smaller firms that don't have full-fledged IT. Our VCIOs, like John, can come in and kind of help map it out. We bring these tools to the table. So there's a lot we can do in that space. And there's some others out on the market. I can follow up after the fact if you're interested. Craig here, we can get you some. Any other questions? Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, I know that was specific to the strategic roadmap, but Power BI is big when it comes to pulling data together that it can be formatted in a way that anybody could look at. I mean, we have it available, and it's all the way down to staff. Like, I can go in there and see my time utilization, hours worked, PTO taken, something as simple as that, to charts and metrics that'll show leadership exactly where the business is going from a profitability perspective. So that's something we can help with as well. Just again, tying it all together, being the connector. It's where it's at. It's information technology, people. Come on.
All right, I don't see any more questions. If anyone comes up with anything after they've mulled it over a little bit, feel free to follow up. The slideshow's available for download. Our contact information is in there. Or feel free to drop it in a survey. If something comes up, we can follow up with you after the fact. But thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure working through all 3 parts of the series. What a blast. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.